Hello, everyone. Welcome to Health Freedom UnMuzzled. I am Maija Dr, and today we have a great show for you. We have a famous doctor, Dr. James Newenschwander. We call him Dr. New, to talk to you about coronavirus. Buckle up. Here we go. I am so excited for our guest here today, Dr. James Neuenschwander. He's a medical doctor here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, to talk to you about coronavirus. He is Michigan's most famous and outspoken frontline doctors. He has been profiled on the film Vaxxed. He's a frequent medical expert on the show The High Wire with Del Bigtree, and he is often in a headline or a headline speaker for freedom rallies, educational symposiums in Michigan and beyond. He is an outspoken advocate for children's health. He has been fighting against the corruption of the CDC and the National Institutes of Health. He does many public speaking events. He is one of those brave doctors that we need across this country to stand up to the corruption and the big pharma bought medical institutions. So I am really happy to have Dr. New here. Thank you, Dr. New, for being here on Health Freedom UnMuzzled. I'm really excited about today's topic, to talk about coronavirus vaccines. And it's a big hot topic, and everyone's kind of wondering, what are these vaccines? What can they do to you? What are the dangers? What are the pros? What are the cons? And you are the perfect person to get those answers. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Maija. Thank you so much for having me on. You know, it's been an interesting journey. You start doing integrative medicine, you start talking to people that are chronically ill. That invariably leads to taking care of kids that are chronically ill. And then you start hearing the stories. And, you know, that's what got me here. I don't want to be here. I would just as soon have a nice, easy family practice, you know, go to work every day, come home every night, not have to do all this advocacy. But if you truly want to help people heal, you have to go to the source of what's making them sick in the first place. And for a chunk of the patients I see, it's environmental toxins, and vaccines are very high on that list.
Well, as you know, I'm a mother of 3 vaccine-injured children, so vaccines and the harm that they do is a personal experience with me, and what got me into this in the first place as well. And I just appreciate brave doctors such as yourself that are willing to come out and speak against what the majority of doctors and scientists are saying is incorrect, right? And it's really sad to see that they demonize doctors like you, that dare to question the problem with our vaccine program. So tell me, the big hot topic with COVID, we have 2 COVID vaccines out right now. We're seeing millions of Americans get it. Is this a problem?
Well, I think the whole COVID vaccine process has really given everybody a front row seat to the vaccine approval process and just how vaccines are tested for safety and efficacy. And, you know, I mean, I have people tell me, oh, my God, they're only looking at this many people and they've only studied safety for 2 months. And I just want to tell them, you know, this is much better than almost all the vaccines we have in the childhood schedule. And people don't get it. I mean, at least with COVID, you had a saline placebo control group, although that's rapidly disappearing. And you had decent numbers. You had 30,000 in the Moderna group, 40,000 plus in the Pfizer group. So you had decent numbers of people. But again, you just see how rushed all this stuff becomes. And people come to me and say, should I get this vaccine? And right away, my first response is, I have no idea, because they're not giving us the data. And that's what happens over and over again with these vaccines. You know, I spent a lot of hours studying vaccine safety, and it's enough to make your mind just go, you know, when you start looking at what they consider adequate vaccine safety science. And this is just a front row seat to tell you how they think and how they're moving forward with vaccine safety. And it's very scary, because we are unleashing an unproven, not FDA approved. I mean, it's really important that all your listeners and viewers understand this. This is emergency use authorization. It is not FDA approved. because they would actually have to go through a whole bunch more hoops to get it FDA approved, and they haven't done that. And it is scary for us. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns in this vaccine because it's not just, we're not repurposing a flu vaccine for COVID. We are coming out with completely brand new technology. And by the way, it looks like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is going to be approved anytime. So now we'll have 3 vaccines here in the U.S.
What's the difference between the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the 2 that we have right now, the Moderna and the Pfizer one?
Okay, so Moderna and Pfizer, this is brand new technology. So what they're doing is they're taking a man-made messenger RNA, and critical to understand that this is not something that they pulled out of nature and then repurposed and they're giving it as a vaccine. This is created in a lab. So messenger RNA codes for proteins. So the idea is we're going to take this messenger RNA that codes for proteins for that spike protein you hear about. That's what allows that virus to bind and actually become infectious. They're taking messenger RNA that codes for some of those spike proteins. They're encapsulating in this magical formula of little fats and then injecting that into people. The idea is that messenger RNA will be taken up by cells, co-opt the cell's machinery to start making those viral proteins, and then the immune system will react to that and create the immune response that we want from an infection or from a vaccine. That's the purpose of the vaccine. So that's the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. Brand new technology, has never been used successfully. They've tried it on a number of other viruses. It was not successful. But this is the first time that they're trying it in a mass vaccination program like this. Johnson & Johnson takes a different approach. It's more like the AstraZeneca vaccine, the Oxford vaccine that they're using in England that they've been using for a bit. Now here you're taking the actual viral proteins from the coronavirus and putting them into a viral shell. So we have what's called adenoviruses, that they have the shell, it's empty, there's no viral DNA or RNA in there, and they just take that RNA and stuff it in there, and that becomes the delivery system. And that's more like a traditional vaccine where you're actually giving the viral proteins and expecting the body to then make an immune response to it. So again, Pfizer and Moderna, brand new technology. The Johnson & Johnson approach, we do have vaccines like that. The dengue vaccine, for example, uses that kind of vector. There's a newer Ebola vaccine that uses that kind of vector. So at least we got a little bit of track record with that one.
Well, the dengue vaccine hasn't been very successful, has it?
Well, that's called that immune priming, right? If you've had dengue. So I mean, I'm not a dengue. Don't talk to me about tropical diseases. I practice in Michigan. What do I know about dengue? But it turns out the first round of dengue is not that bad. It's when you get it, I guess there's 4 or 5 types of dengue. It's when you get the second round that it's really deadly. So when you come in and you vaccinate people with the dengue vaccine when they've never seen dengue before, and you vaccinate them, and then they get dengue, that immune priming is going to kill a bunch of people. That's what happened in the Philippines. All right. And that's what they're worried about with this messenger RNA stuff as well, because we have evidence of that with SARS-1, the first SARS virus, where when they tried to develop vaccines for that virus in animal models, these animals were getting much, much sicker when they were subsequently exposed to the virus itself after vaccination. It turns out the animals that had been vaccinated had much worse disease when they were exposed to SARS. So the vaccine not only didn't prevent the disease, it actually made it worse when they did get the disease. And, we call it immunologic priming or antibody-induced enhancement, immune enhancement. There's all kinds of terms for it. But basically, it's the idea that the vaccine is going to prime that immune system, tee it up, so when the virus comes along, rather than knocking out the virus, it actually makes the infection worse. And that was one of the early concerns with this current vaccine.
I know there's been a lot of talk about the mRNA changing our DNA. Is there any validity to that?
There's a whole lot of talk about a lot of things out there. I mean, here's the thing. There's a lot of theoreticals, all right? And this is where we run into trouble because, for people like me that deal with vaccine-injured patients, that's not my number one concern. Is this Frankenstein medicine? Are we going to permanently alter the human genome because we're using this man-made messenger RNA? Who knows? I mean, honestly, who knows? But it is a theoretical possibility. The important thing to understand, RNA is not DNA. right? DNA is what we have inside our nucleus that holds our genetic code. That's what replicates every time the cell goes. And, that's sort of the blueprint for who we are. RNA is made from DNA for a few different reasons. The biggest one is to actually make proteins. So DNA to RNA, RNA to protein. And the protein is what, the enzymes allows us to do everything our body does. So every cell actually has in it an enzyme called reverse transcriptase. And I shouldn't say every cell, almost every cell has reverse transcriptase in it. So theoretically, reverse transcriptase will convert RNA back into DNA. So theoretically, we could translate that human-made messenger RNA into a fragment of DNA and incorporate that DNA into our genome. All right, so that's kind of scary because now every time that cell divides, that cell has the genes for the coronavirus spike protein. Right? How many people die of SARS-CoV-2? A very tiny fraction of the people that get it. And rather than spending the billions of dollars we spent on these vaccines on understanding the biology of that and doing something about that, why haven't we done more of that rather than putting all eggs into this experimental theoretical vaccine basket and saying this is what's going to save mankind? A very wise person, and I wish I knew who it was that said it, you don't find health at the end of a needle or at the bottom of a bottle of pills. You don't. And the healthy people that get this virus do fine. They don't need a vaccine. And that's why you see a lot of people going, well, I'm not going to inject that. Medical people, because they know, right? They're the ones seeing
there's
the
been
damage.
a lot of questionable, seems to be nefarious things that have been going on recently with COVID. When you look at the science, and we've known the hydroxychloroquine has been a treatment for SARS, and coronaviruses, but that was really a suppressed talking point, and I don't know if it was political or something else, but now we see that there's some really great treatments for COVID, the ivermectin's out there, but we're still not talking about that, and we're really still pushing a untested, safety tested, fast-tracked vaccine when what is the odds of, if you look and balance, the pros and cons, you're getting a vaccine, you have no idea what it's going to do to your body versus you have a sickness and what are your chances of dying it without, treatment, just for the population in general, but then also having these new treatments out there. I would think that taking on this disease with the current treatments is a significantly safer option than the coronavirus vaccines that are out right now. Would you agree?
I would think so. But again, when we're talking medical judgment, somebody comes to my office and says, Dr. New, should I get the vaccine? What I'm supposed to do is take out the scales of justice, right? And on one side, I'm going to put what is their risk of COVID, all right? They're 35 years old, ideal body weight, they're healthy, they exercise, they have good vitamin D levels, they don't really get sick. Their risk is essentially zero. I mean, it's as close to zero as you're going to get with any infection, right? So you have to put that on one side of the scale. On the other side of the scale, and you can figure that out. I think Cleveland Clinic has a risk calculator. You can plug in your particulars and it'll kind of give you a risk. On the other side of the scale, I'm supposed to put the risk of a vaccine that's supposed to be effective, right? Because if over here we're worried about COVID, then number one, the vaccine better prevent COVID. And number two, we better know what the risks of the vaccine are. Guess what? We don't know either one of those with these new vaccines. So on one side, I have knowledge. On the other side, I have nothing. How do you make a medical decision to do that? I don't know. Because even if you're high risk, let's say you're 85 years old, you're in a nursing home, you have at least 3 comorbid conditions, including type 2 diabetes, you're 50 pounds overweight, you're like a disaster, right? You're a COVID death waiting to happen. Is that vaccine going to work for you? I don't know. Have they studied on 85-year-olds with 3 comorbid conditions? I don't think so. Right?
I haven't seen that.
No, in the Pfizer trial, you had 16 people that got COVID that were over 65. 16, 16, that's it. I mean, how do you make medical judgments based on that?
Didn't they come out and say that it was 90% effective? Where do they get those numbers? Is that completely debunked? What is that?
Well, all right. So this is, there's an old saying that you can design a study to say whatever you want it to say. It's one of my favorite Mark Twain quotes. There's three kinds of lies, damn lies, and statistics. So when you do one of these studies to try and figure out efficacy, you take, in the case of Pfizer, it was about 40,000 people. In the case of Moderna, it was about 30,000 people. And you take half of them and you vaccinate them, the other half you give saline. But you can't then go in and expose everybody to COVID, because that would be unethical. But that's what they do in animal models, which is why they don't need those big of numbers. So you have to sit there and wait until X number of people get the disease. And this they work out with the FDA ahead of time. So it was somewhere between 150, 200 people. They were going to look at, once they had that many cases, they'd figure out how many were in each group. So with Pfizer, it was 170 something people that they had. And it turned out that 95% of the cases of COVID were in the unvaccinated group. So that's where you come up with this 95%. And it was the same with Moderna. Now, the problem with that is these are swab positive cases. They only swab people that reached certain criteria. So if you had cold-like symptoms, you weren't necessarily swabbed. And it turns out there were over 3,000 people in the Pfizer trial that had cold-like symptoms that were never swabbed. Well, isn't that what COVID is? I mean, it's coronaviruses. They cause colds. You didn't swab any of those people. And that's why they can't really tell you, because I'm sorry, but if you say 95% efficacy in my little world, it means, if I took 100 people and I exposed them all to COVID, the people that were vaccinated, only 5 of them would get sick. And the people that were unvaccinated, 95% of them would get sick. And I'm assuming that's what everybody thinks when you say 95% efficacy.
Absolutely. That's what they're selling.
No, but that's what they're selling is exactly right. But that's not how it's done. All right. When they developed, and remember, these people were not sick. They just met the criteria to be swabbed. Right. So, none of these people were hospitalized. None of these people died in either group. So you can't even tell you, does it do what everybody would want it to do, which is I'm either going to get vaccinated because I'm afraid COVID's going to kill me or going to make me really sick. Right. Or you get vaccinated because you want to protect grandma or somebody else. You want to go back to a Lions game in a stadium. Right. So these studies didn't show either one of those things. All they showed was that the people that were mildly symptomatic were more likely to be in the unvaccinated group. That's it.
So we don't even know if it stops transmission. So a lot of people are getting the COVID vaccine saying, well, I have an older mother or grandmother and I need to protect her. Feeling like, oh, well, it's not so much of a danger to me, but I just want to make sure I'm protecting loved ones in society. So there's no validity to that?
Nope. No. I mean, you have Tony Fauci himself saying getting vaccinated is not going to stop you from wearing a mask or going to a restaurant or visiting a nursing home or going to a ball game. He said that. All right. And he said that recently. This is not ancient history. So here's the problem. If the study if you do not swab people, like they should have taken out of that 30,000 or 40,000 that Pfizer did, they should have taken 3,000. We paid them billions with a B of dollars for this, right? They could have very easily taken a few thousand people to be a sample of that big group and swabbed everybody once a week, once every month, whatever. We know from previous trials, AstraZeneca did these monkey trials, all right? Remember, Moderna and Pfizer did not. But AstraZeneca did monkey trials. They gave the monkeys the vaccine. They waited until, whatever amount of time for them to develop the neutralizing antibodies. And then they exposed them all to coronavirus, to SARS-CoV-2. It turns out the monkeys didn't get sick. Now that's efficacy, right? You can prove efficacy with that. The monkeys didn't get sick. None of them, the virus didn't make it into the lower respiratory tract. They didn't get sick. But almost 100% of those monkeys swabbed positive for the virus. They were carriers. They were that infamous asymptomatic super spreader that we're all wearing masks to prevent, right? And so they don't want to do that, because if they do that and show that it doesn't prevent asymptomatic carrier, then the vaccine's a failure.
Like we see with the DTaP vaccine, right?
Right, the pertussis, exactly. And by the way, with polio as well, the polio shot can cause asymptomatic carriers, but pertussis is a big problem, whooping cough. That does not prevent the carrier state. So you can carry the pertussis bacteria, infect people without ever knowing you're sick because you're completely asymptomatic. So it's the same problem with the vaccine, is that if you're vaccinated and you get exposed to COVID, we don't know if you can carry the virus and be asymptomatic.
Yes.
Right. And we have no idea what the long-term side effects are. Again, that other side of the scales of justice. All right. We don't know how efficacious the vaccine is at preventing hospitalization, death, and transmission. Those are the reasons why people think they're getting vaccinated. And we also don't know the side effects. That's the other big part that you put on the scales of justice. Right. And we don't have that. We have no idea what's on that side.
And we have no idea why those that get it may have pre-existing conditions, what that's going to do for their pre-existing conditions. I'm even hearing that now they're allowing pregnant women to get that. Do we have any idea what this could be causing to their fetuses? No. Why would we? We don't know what the flu vaccine and the DTaP vaccine do to fetuses. Sorry, but we don't. Okay, there's been, for all of those women that got vaccinated for the flu and for DTaP, there's only been one study, one trial where they compared a woman that was vaccinated, and I think this was for DTaP, to unvaccinated women, where they actually looked at the neurodevelopmental outcomes of the fetus beyond a month or two. And that was 48 women. 30 got vaccinated, or 30 got vaccinated, 18 were unvaccinated. And in that trial, at 14 months when they tested the babies, all the neurodevelopmental delay risks were in the vaccinated group. But guess what? If all you got is 30 in the vaccinated and 18 in the unvaccinated, you have no statistical power in that. You can't say, well, there is statistical difference, but you can say all the delays were in the vaccinated group. And that is the one and only study, and they vaccinate millions and millions and millions of pregnant women every year. Every single pregnant woman, right? Every single pregnant woman is recommended to get the Tdap and to get the flu vaccine during pregnancy. Absolutely. And we already know that an enhanced immune response from a pregnant woman is going to have an effect on their baby. We have plenty of research and science on that. Why do we boost an immune response in any pregnant women is beyond me.
That makes two of us. No, when I trained, no pregnant woman got a vaccine. The only vaccine they got was Rogam, and then that was to prevent rejection of a Rh positive baby if they were Rh negative blood type. That was it. And basically the tenet of what you do with pregnant women is don't piss off the immune system, because it is a specialized immune state that allows the woman to maintain the pregnancy. So that's like miscarriage and all that sort of stuff. But when you're talking about the brain development of an infant, I mean, particularly if you're talking about Tdap, which has neurotoxins like aluminum, all right? Now, you can say what you want about aluminum, but if I injected aluminum into somebody's brain, it's going to be toxic. We don't do that in pregnancy. We inject it into mom, but it does mobilize, and it can affect that a baby's brain development. You affect a few cells when you're a few cells big, you're going to affect everything. You affect a few cells when you're my age, when you're old fart like me, nothing happens, right? But the earlier you intervene with something negative like that, the worse it's going to be. And we have no idea. Yeah. How many of these, I always say, to heck with any of the vaccine injury monitoring systems we have, like VAERS, to heck with that. We have Facebook, right? I wish Facebook was a searchable database, because we'd find all these cases. I mean, of women pregnant, getting vaccinated, and miscarrying a week or two later. Oh, but it had nothing to do with the vaccine. It was a second trimester miscarriage. Those aren't common. Come on.
You hear so many stories. They don't want to look at them. Well, and also, if you look at the flu vaccine, and many people say, oh, there's no more mercury in any vaccines. Well, the multiviral flu vaccine has mercury in it. And we tell moms when they're pregnant, be careful of your fish, right? There's mercury in fish. You got to be careful what you're eating, but go ahead and get the flu vaccine that contains mercury, and that's going to be perfectly fine. It's crazy. It's crazy. And it's really sad that there's doctors out there that are recommending that and not doing their research. It's so frustrating.
Well, even when you have people get injured, right? I mean, you had this doctor in Florida who, gets his COVID vaccine, develops something called ITP, idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, where you basically destroy all your platelets. You need platelets to clot. So without platelets, you bleed. And he had 0 platelets. They did everything they could. 2 weeks later, he has an intracranial bleed and he dies. And the first thing Pfizer says is it's not connected with the vaccine. I mean, number one, how would you even know, that it's not connected with the vaccine? And number two, why wouldn't you say, well, we're concerned about that. Let's look into the details, what happened, blah, blah, blah. They don't even want to look at it because, again, they're all terrified. It's sort of the mindset of the vaccine movement. I mean, this whole idea that we're going to vaccinate ourselves into a state of health, they believe that. Number two, all vaccines are safe and effective because every vaccine they've developed is safe and effective. Therefore, this vaccine is safe and effective. I mean, that's kind of the way they think. We know we haven't proven that the COVID vaccine prevents hospitalization and death. We know it hasn't done that. We just believe it's going to do that. Why? Because every other vaccine does that. Okay, now it's no longer science. We're going to follow the science. Let me reach through that television and strangle you, all right? Because we're not following the science. This is a religion. We're all praying to the gods of vaccines. It's not science, right? Science would tell you that, you know what? When we vaccinated 1 million people, 1 person got ITP. Okay, well, now you know the risk, all right? The risk is 1 in 1 million. That would be acceptable for most people. Right? But we don't know that risk because they're not even looking at it. They won't even investigate it. We know there are people that don't respond to this vaccine. And we know that there are people that over-respond to this vaccine. When they did the phase 1 trial, these were all healthy 18 to 55-year-old, primarily white people that got the vaccine. And almost all of them had high fevers and chills and aches and fatigue and all that stuff, right? When you give that same vaccine to somebody who's 80, you don't get the same response. Right? Why is that? Because their immune system's different. There's variability in how people respond to these vaccines. So
let's talk a little bit about the reactions that you did see that they reported, or that they reported that there were some adverse events during the trials, right? But then they backpedaled a bit and said, oh, that was not related in any way. There was maybe a pre-existing condition. The person already had MS, or tell me a little bit about that.
Well, there's sort of a few famous cases with the AstraZeneca vaccine. So that's going to be more like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that's going to be approved, where you actually had a few neurologic syndromes that they stopped the AstraZeneca trials in the United States as a result of that. So in England, they very quickly, within a week, determined that these had nothing to do with the vaccine. Not sure how they did that, but that's what they determined. And with the one woman developed multiple sclerosis, and they said it was pre-existing. Now, they did not, when they got the vaccine authorized, they did not say people with MS history shouldn't get the vaccine, right? That didn't become a contraindication, but they blamed pre-existing conditions with that. With the Pfizer vaccine, again, you are seeing a couple of, well, you're seeing a few things. I mean, one is a lot of people they just get their butt kicked, particularly with the second vaccine. I mean, to the point where they tell hospitals, don't vaccinate everybody, vaccinate people in shifts, because after that second vaccine, they're going to be out for 2 or 3 days. I mean, they're going to be off work for 2 or 3 days.
Because they have symptoms of COVID, or what is keeping them out?
No, they're just fevers, severe body pain, shaking chills, and debilitating fatigue. Okay, those are the big ones. And for those in the trials, those were in the 50-60% of the people that got it, the second vaccine in that range. So it's not rare. So that was one set of people that just had these severe, short-term reactions. But then you had this set of people that had obvious autoimmune stuff. So my scan of Facebook, I've seen at least 3 reports of ITP. All right. So what's the actual number? I don't know, because they're not tracking these people the way they should. So, but we know that there's that kind of autoimmunity. The second is there's all this neurologic stuff. So when they did the original studies to see, where did the vaccine go? The vaccine does go to the brain. At least in animal models, it does, right? So again, we're seeing these weird neurologic disorders. We're seeing, myoclonus, where people will get shaking tremors, or we'll see, these where they get rigid, or they look like they have Parkinson's disease, or they get these herky-jerky, chorea-like movements, all kinds of weird neurologic stuff. So clearly, in my mind, I see that with other vaccines. That's immune-based brain inflammation that's creating those kinds of symptoms. So it's either direct damage from the immune system, or the immune system's creating inflammatory compounds, and that's affecting the way the brain works. All right. So, and we're seeing that again. Are they admitting to any of that stuff? Not really. Because the whole purpose of the vaccine program is to get everybody vaccinated. That's really what they're all about. They want to get everybody vaccinated with every vaccine that they can, because I don't think they're inherently evil. I think they believe it actually works. That if we just vaccinated enough people, we'd all be healthy. And this is what's happening with COVID. If it doesn't prevent spread, well, then we just need to vaccinate 100% of people.
Well, right? Did you hear that the CDC just recently changed the definition of herd immunity? They just said that herd immunity comes from vaccinated.
Yeah, I think they changed it back.
Did they change it back?
I think they added it back in. Yeah.
Good.
No,
they should have gotten some flack for it. So I'm glad that they might have done that.
Yeah.
Good.
No, herd immunity was originally described with measles, and this is back in the 1920s, long before there was a measles vaccine. And it was the idea that, because measles, you'd have these, they would come through and you get a bunch of people would get it, and then it would disappear for a few years, and then come back in, you get a big rush of measles cases again. And it was a percentage of the population, the herd, that got measles before it stopped circulating again. That's how they defined herd immunity. And it was just co-opted by the vaccines after the polio vaccine. That was really the beginning of using the term herd immunity to describe successful vaccination. So, but again, how can you obtain herd immunity if you can't prevent transmission?
Right.
If you can't prevent transmission, you don't have herd immunity, because a healthy person can transmit it to somebody who's susceptible, and you haven't stopped the death. I care when people get sick, but at the end of the day, I don't care how many people get COVID. I care how many people get really sick, how many people die, how many people are hospitalized, how many people are debilitated. That's what I care about. And if you can't show that you prevent any of that, how can you say anything about herd immunity from a vaccine? You can't.
Right.
And that's why, again, Tony Fauci has his faults, but even he's saying, no, you're not going to be able to take off your mask. You're not going to, I fly all over the place, and the first thing they say is you have to wear a mask all the time, even if you got the vaccine. Right?
I want to know why on earth, the Oxford is now doing the pediatric trials for the coronavirus. What justification would there ever be for a child to get this vaccine? The children are not susceptible to this disease. They're not in danger of that. And it's not to prevent them from spreading it. The super spreader children, that it seems like they've been trying to push that children are, these super spreading disease carrying, little creatures, and they need to be vaccinated to protect the teachers and grandma and grandpa. But if these vaccines don't prevent transmission, then why would any child that's not susceptible to the dangers of this disease need to have this vaccination?
Right. Again, the number of kids that get seriously ill from COVID is exceedingly small. There have been a few cases of child to adult transmission, but these were kids that were very sick to their parents and, in closed spaces for a long period of time, not an asymptomatic student. And there's a number of fairly large studies now in school systems that show that none of the adult cases were from the kids. The kids got COVID from adults at home, not giving COVID to their teachers. So there really is no justification. Even if it did all the things that it's supposed to do, even if it prevented death and transmission and all that sort of stuff, you still have a hard time justifying using it in kids. Because again, it's not like a measles vaccine where we're going to give you one vaccine and it's going to give you 10, 15, 20 years of immunity, right? These are seasonal viruses. This virus will change. It's changing all the time. So the vaccine you get today is not necessarily going to be protective a year from now, right? And so, you know, that would be the justification. Well, you know, they're going to grow up and, you know, all that sort of thing. No, they're not going to be exposed to the same virus 10 years from now. So there really is no justification. And that's why, you know, companies like Pfizer, you know, they didn't take on the kids. They said 16 and older, because you can show 16-year-olds can spread it, right? They're only now starting to do trials down to 12 years old. They're not even looking at kids under 12.
Yeah, but the vaccine doesn't stop spreading, so there's just absolutely no justification for it. It's insane. But we're reaching a point in our society, it sounds like they're going to be making sure every single person is vaccinated to be able to live freely, to be able to go on airplanes, to be able to buy tickets through Ticketmaster. I mean, it's really, you know, kind of scary when we're thinking about our freedoms and our freedom to choose to get a vaccine and being able to live in society. So I really hope that we start to really analyze and look at the efficacy and the safety of these things and demand that we all have a choice and we can still be free to do that. Because I never imagined that the pharmaceutical company that doesn't have any liability would be able to say, you can't even live in society unless you take our product and give it to everyone you know.
Right. No, it is scary stuff. You know, I'm still of the ilk that you have a big chunk of the population that says we're not going to take this. You of the medical profession that says we're not taking this vaccine. Even people that are pro-vaccine are saying. So I think you have enough people to prevent that from happening, because no matter how much power the pharmaceutical industry might have with the federal government, at the end of the day, we still elect them. And if enough people say no, then they will say no. You know, they will go against the grain. And the other thing is, you know, pharmaceutical companies have to live off of something. Right now, every vaccine in the United States is paid for by the federal government. Of the COVID vaccine is paid for by the federal government. So they know that if the federal government goes bankrupt, there's no industry here. There's nothing. They don't make a penny. So if we destroy our economy by forcing people, I'm sorry, if you have to have a vaccine to get on an airplane, I'm not flying anymore. Sorry, you want me to come to California? It's going to take me 2 days, 3 days to drive there, because I'm not flying. Unless you want to hire me a private jet, I'll do that.
Well, there might be enough of us, so maybe we can make our own airline.
There is one of those in Ireland. Yeah, but you know, again, it's I don't think a company like Delta, who is dependent on people like me flying all over the place, is going to slit their throat for the sake of the pharmaceutical industry. They're not going to do that. You know, they know that there are people that are just going to say, no, I'm not going to take this vaccine. And if that's 30 or 40% of their income, they're not going to do it. So it all comes down to the dollars and cents side of things. It's not just the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, they're very powerful, and they make a boatload of money off these vaccines. You know, Pfizer's #1 product, well, maybe it's a coronavirus vaccine now, but Pfizer's prior #1 product was the Prevnar vaccine. You know, they make more money off of that one vaccine than they make off of any drug in their arsenal. Right? Wow. They're a drug company. They're a pharmaceutical company, but their best-selling drug is a vaccine. You know, and they make $5-6 billion of profit every year off of that. Their sales are $20-25 billion for one vaccine. I mean, it's just insane.
And they're never able to take a loss on that. They're not liable. So it's us taxpayers that will feed those losses. It's unreal.
If I had a pharmaceutical company, all I would be doing would be developing new vaccines. Sorry, that's what I would do. It is the most profitable part of any pharmaceutical company. You have no liability. It's not just no liability. You have a guaranteed market. Okay? Yeah. So remember, the Pfizer vaccine, the U.S. government bought 100 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine before it ever got emergency use authorization. So you don't suppose that somehow influenced the outcome of all this? I mean, come on. This was all predetermined. You know, we're going to take 16, 18, $20 billion, and we're going to throw it in this basket, and we're going to hand it to the pharmaceutical companies, and whoever wins the race gets the money. And right now it's Moderna and Pfizer. And Johnson & Johnson is hot on their heels. You know, it's scary.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about polyethanol glycol. Is that how you pronounce it? Polyethanol glycol. PEG.
Yeah, PEG. PEG.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So there's been some fears about a potential anaphylactic reaction if you have an allergy to PEG. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, so PEG is one compound in the vaccine. We can talk about the liposomes in there as well. But PEG is a compound that is known to induce this immune response. So when PEG is present, you're much more likely to have an anaphylactic, the full life-threatening allergy, not just I got some itching and a few hives here and there, but this is the full-blown, I can't breathe, my throat is closing up kind of allergic reaction. So the concern is that we're unleashing this vaccine with the PEG in it, and that's inducing a lot more anaphylaxis than we would expect from other vaccines. And again, all this stuff is controversial. The FDA wants to say, no, this is just the same as the flu vaccine and everything else. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the data, why should I listen to you? I see it happening. We see it happening. And it's on Facebook. It gets reported. It's in the newspapers. We see it happening. We just don't know to what degree compared with other vaccines. And again, the feds have access to these huge databases. They can do instant studies to see if there's a link. The trouble is the person that is liable for paying for injury is the one doing the study, right? That's the CDC. I mean, it's just ridiculous. We don't have the FAA going out and investigating plane crashes. We don't have Boeing going investigating plane crashes. We don't have Ford Motor Company going out investigating automobile accidents. Because guess what? It'd be all driver and pilot error. There was nothing wrong with the airplane. There was nothing wrong with the car, right? And that's what's happening here. It's like having Boeing investigate every plane crash.
Tell me a little bit about these proteins. There's been some talk about potential infertility, that there's some proteins that are in these vaccines that could actually be so close to our own human proteins that it might attack some of our cells and cause potential, pregnancy loss.
Yeah, this again, there's a lot of theoretical stuff here until people have been taking this long enough. We just don't know. But it turns out that viruses have been with us forever. So a big chunk of our genome doesn't code for human proteins that we know of. One of the theories is these are viruses that we've had. But it turns out that there is a protein that we sort of inherited from these viruses that allows the placenta to actually invade and attach to the uterus. All right. So without that, things separate. You don't have that attachment going on. And so there was concern because one of the genetic sequences that they got out of the genome from the vaccine, one of the sequences was similar to that protein. And the question was, if you created an immune response to that particular protein, what would it do to your ability to conceive? And the answer is, we don't know, right? Because it's there's a lot of theoreticals here. We just don't know what the outcomes are. A lot of us are just concerned about just activating the immune system. We all have enough autoimmune antibodies floating around. We don't need to piss off our immune systems and allow those levels to rise and create problems for us. So it almost doesn't matter what's in the vaccine because, back to these liposomes that they have in there as well. So the messenger RNA is encapsulated in a liposome. And these liposomes can set off an immune response as well. It's not just the PEG, and that's part of why people have such a robust immune response. They don't have to put aluminum in this one to make it work. All by itself, it creates this kind of hyper-stimulated immune response. And that's always in my brain is saying, well, what's that doing to the immune system over the long run? How is that creating, problems, and especially in pregnancy, right? I mean, if you hyper-stimulate that immune system in pregnancy, you don't have to have these fancy viral proteins there to target. Just the immune response itself would destroy the pregnancy. Right?
It's so scary to think that these women that are still of birthing age are getting this vaccine, and we have absolutely no idea how that's going to affect their infertility, their fertility, how that is going to affect their offspring. And it's just unbelievable. I mean, how much of the population is going to actually have this vaccine, and what's that going to be in the next 30 years to show us?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Well, that's pretty much I'll get back to you in 20 years because it's going to take us that long to figure it out, right? We're not going to know that. You know, and they're not going to investigate it. I mean, the federal government is not going to go looking for problems because they have almost everybody convinced the vaccines are safe and effective. And if you say anything else, you're a whack job. And if you're a whack job, then you lose your funding, you lose your teaching positions, you lose your positions at the university. I mean, one of the reasons why I can do what I do is I'm not attached to a hospital. I don't work for a corporation. I don't have a university appointment, right? I mean, I have my own private practice. And my practice is successful because I help people get better. So I don't have to advertise. I don't have to count on this person or that person promoting me. My patients promote me. Right. But that's one of the few reasons why I can do it. And most of these other doctors can't. Because I'm sorry, if you take somebody and you say, you have a choice. You have a choice between your income and looking the other way. You know, I know everybody would say, oh, I would not look the other way. I would do the right thing. Yeah, until you get stuck in those shoes. I'm not going to judge any doctor for doing that. I'm not going to judge anybody for doing that because it takes a lot of guts to say, you know what, to hell with you. You know, this is the truth. I'm going to fight for the truth, come hell or high water. And one of the biggest problems with our movement, I mean, look at what happened with Andy Wakefield. He was all by himself when all that stuff happened. All by himself. As soon as they started going after him, everyone went, woo, pariah, let's not go anywhere near him. All right. And the biggest mistake we make is we don't stick together. You know, we have all this little infighting. No, we have to support each other. If somebody's willing to step out and defend your rights, then you should be behind them 100%.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, there's doctors even today that are being threatened. Their licenses are being taken away for actually standing up and asking the question concerning vaccines. It's like vaccines topics have become so taboo, and physicians see what happens to these physicians when they actually step out.
Right.
Very sad.
No, it is. You know, we're gonna make an example of this person so that nobody else will even think about doing what he did.
Right.
Or she did.
And now medicine has become so much like the big box stores, right? You know, you having a small your own practice is really unique here in America these days. You know, because most of them are being bought off by like Spectrum or these large institutions, and you're at the mercy of that institution. You no longer have the autonomy to make the medical decisions for your patients that you think is in the best interest. So, you have to follow cookie cutter medicine, which might not be the best thing that's, for your patients. And it's really sad that that's where we're at.
Yeah. No, medicine really has become one big algorithm, where you just plug in where you're at in the algorithm and the computer will tell you what the next step is. But, those algorithms work for X percent of people. Let's say it's 80% effective. That would be a really great algorithm. With medicine, it's all become algorithms. And any disease state, all you need is a computer and figure out where you're at on the decision tree. The computer will tell you what to do next. So these algorithms are based on what they call best practices. And that is what has been determined by the literature to be the best way to treat, let's say, high blood pressure. Well, that's great. Let's say it's 80% effective. That would be a really good algorithm. But what about the other 20% where it doesn't work for them? The algorithm has no answer for them. And those are the people that show up at my practice. And I've seen this doctor and that doctor and this doctor and that doctor. I've seen 20 doctors and they can't help me. And I just want to say, no, you've seen one doctor 20 times because they're all doing the same thing, right? You have to step out of those algorithms and saying, well, what's actually under the surface? When I started bioenergy, our tagline was healing illness at its source. Don't look at the symptom. What's causing the problem? What's under the surface that's creating these issues? Is it environmental toxicity? Is it poor nutrition? Are you deficient in something? Is your gut messed up? Are you injured by something? What can we do about that underlying condition? Because the body's natural state is health. And they don't teach you about that in medical school.
You are such a gem for medicine, Doc. Remember that show, House, I think they called it, Dr. House? The one guy that could figure out everything. You're like the Dr. House in reality. New. People come to you from all over the country to cure them of the disease that, like you said, so many people went to so many different doctors and they just couldn't get health. And you're actually look beyond what's been told in medical school and these pharmacy-owned medical programs and to look at real health and real medicine. So you are a gem, and your wife's a gem.
Thank you.
And the two of you, you know, and you also, you have your biomedical, the Bioenergy Medical Center, but you two also have the Creating Brighter Futures ABA Autism Center as well, too, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you
this
guys are helping all kinds of people. I mean, I'm a speech pathologist and autism specialist, and back in the 90s, I started as an ABA therapist, and it's good to see that there's still heroes out there and ones that know the cause of a lot of these kids with autism, because I get very frustrated as a speech pathologist, and I want to give conferences and I want to, you know, speak at our conventions to talk about, let's really get to the source of autism. And it's so taboo. You can't talk about vaccines and autism. I mean, it's such a lie. I think it's one of the greatest lies that humans have ever experienced. You know, mankind, the greatest lie ever told is that vaccines don't cause autism. We know that vaccines they can, and they continue to. You know, back in the 90s, it was, when I started, it was 1 in 500 kids, and the parents were screaming from the rooftops that my child regressed into autism. My perfectly beautiful developing child regressed into autism after the vaccines. And back then, before Big Pharma controlled all the advertising slots in the media, before they controlled all the medical institutions and the scientific grants, before it was completely consumed by Big Pharma, it was okay to talk about it. And it started to get quite a buzz. Like, maybe we really need to look into these vaccines. Why are we getting this great rise in autism? And then suddenly we start seeing the propaganda machine and the demonization of such people like Dr. Andrew Wakefield, actually doctors that have raised significant questions that we should have been asking long ago. But instead, it was a campaign of misinformation to say vaccines can't, and will never cause autism, and there's got to be any other reason why. And ever since then, I mean, autism rising and rising and rising. We now today have 1 in 36 kids with autism, and we still can't address, you know, the skeleton in the closet that these vaccines, as we continue to rise in our vaccination rates, and 72 doses now since, you know, 1986.
Right.
And now we have 1 in 36 kids. It's a global epidemic. And, you know, we have the National Institutes of Health, and we have Health and Human Services that say that they are looking at diseases, these pandemics, but why aren't they looking at autism? And now we've got they're saying that now we have to embrace autism, like embrace it for its uniqueness and the way they're born. And this is a beautiful thing, right? Where, to me, autism is brain damage. They have been damaged, and these perfectly beautiful children regressed because of something we injected into them. And I really hope that we can begin to stop that narrative and really looking at the truth in science. And I appreciate organizations like Dr. Jack has with IPAC, and getting money grants to scientists that are actually willing to take and look at this, look at the science, and not be fearful that they're not going to get grant money in the future.
Right. Well, we need to do that. We need to also figure out a way to pressure our public health officials to do the studies that they said they were going to do. You know, they in 2015, they published a white paper, and this was after, you know, over and over, do vaccines cause autism? The reality is they studied one vaccine, the MMR, and one ingredient, thimerosal. And I can argue every one of those studies to the death because they were terrible. But, you know, okay, we'll grant them that. They've not studied any other vaccine and its connection to autism. And most of us really believe the DTaP is the bigger issue. Then, you know, the MMR might be the thing that pushes you over the edge of the cliff, but it's a DTaP to get you up to the edge. And many of us believe that there's a lot more damage caused by that vaccine than, or you get more than one of those, you get 4 or 5 of them, but that, you know, caused by that. And
I think it's the aluminum in that, the high levels of aluminum. I know Dr. Chris Exley, you know, the aluminum toxicologist, has discovered the massive amounts of aluminum in the brains of severely autistic children. So, and I know the DTaP has quite a bit. My son regressed into autism from the DTaP as well. So, and I've heard many, many stories, thousands of them across the world, of children with the DTaP. So,
right. No, and that's what I've heard in my practice. It's much more the DTaP than the MMR. And yeah, aluminum probably plays a role. It is a big time immune enhancer. It creates chronic inflammation. It's a direct neurotoxin. So unlike other things, it doesn't just stimulate the immune response. It's toxic in and of itself. It's a heavy metal. It's kind of like the way mercury damages or lead damages. Aluminum does the same thing. And it definitely has an affinity for certain parts of the brain. That's what actually studies show. But, there's other people doing that type of research. But yeah, we need to get behind organizations that are going to fund these scientists, because they're not getting money from the NIH. They're not getting money from their university. They're not getting, even a tenured professor at a university. They can't be fired. But you got to remember, the university is getting funding from the pharmaceutical companies. Right? So they might not have a direct connection, but it's going to be like, well, yeah, if you want a grant for that pet project you have, sorry, you're not going to get it if you keep going down this aluminum road. And so the studies aren't done. And the people that are responsible, the CDC, the Health and Human Services, they're responsible for vaccine safety. They won't do the studies. They have the technology. Tomorrow, they could compare a large group of unvaccinated kids to a large group of vaccinated kids with the databases they already have right now. They could do it tomorrow. We could have an answer by next week. All right?
Well, that makes you think that maybe they have.
Really?
Maybe they just
You're such a conspiracy theorist. Listen to you.
I mean, what would happen if they discover that their entire vaccine program was hurting and harming millions of children around the world? I mean, would they admit to such a thing? Can't imagine.
No, they wouldn't. And, they're terrified of finding anything. A link with asthma, link with environmental allergy, any kind of link, because they're afraid if they find anything negative with vaccines, that everybody will start vaccinating and all of a sudden polio and smallpox will come back. I mean, that's sort of the mindset that they have. And they completely discount the health benefits of just healthy living and good food and all the things that keep us healthy. They don't even look at that. You want herd immunity? Give people vitamin D. Get them outside. Get them real food. Get rid of all the crap that people eat. That will give you herd immunity, because now when you get sick, you don't get sick. Right? You just get immune. That's herd immunity.
Any last words, Dr. New?
Hopefully I'm here tomorrow. Listen, I want people to know that right now there's a whole bunch of information out there that is right off of the CDC that tells you that they just have never done really in-depth safety evaluation of any vaccine. So I want people to know right now, this COVID vaccine has actually done much better than any other vaccine out there. It's the only vaccine that has ever been compared to a saline placebo. Now, they're getting rid of the placebo group, but they actually use the saline placebo. That has never been done before. All right. So if people are concerned about the safety of this vaccine and this COVID vaccine, they should be very concerned about the safety of the entire vaccine schedule, because they have been studied less for safety than this vaccine. That's the mind-blowing part of this. I don't know what to put on that one side of the scales of justice, but you know what? Whatever I have from the COVID vaccine is more than I have from almost any other vaccine out there. And that is mind-blowing. And I want people to understand that this is so much more than, do I get the COVID vaccine or not? So hopefully that message gets out there. And I thank you a bunch for being on the show. This is awesome. We need more people like you out there. We need more people spreading the words. We need more people like you out there. We need more people spreading the words. We need more people fighting for the truth, because that's the only thing that's ever going to change this.
We're so happy to have you, Dr. New. You are a blessing. God bless you. Thank you so much for all the work that you do, the advocacy you do, and the education that you do. And I'll have you on again. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Health Freedom Unmuzzled. Bye-bye.